Thomas. Hope you enjoyed the music while you waited. This is the second, as I mentioned, of a three-part series to explore the history, discuss solutions, and create an action agenda to bring fair and affordable housing to all of Westchester. The series is co-sponsored by Community Voices Heard, Irvington Activists, Sustainable Portchester Alliance, and Westchester Putnam Working Families Party. We encourage you during the course of the webinar today to post questions in the chat and via the Q&A feature throughout the evening as well. And we will, at the end of the program, try to select a couple of those questions to pose to our panelists, of which we have quite a few this evening at the end of the evening. So now I would invite you to watch this video greeting from Congressman Jamal Bowman.
Thank you so much for having me. I am humbled to be speaking alongside these distinguished leaders, activists, and advocates for housing justice and affordable housing for all. Social housing is a brilliant remedy to the affordable housing crisis we're seeing in Westchester and across our country. Social housing is a public option for housing, an option that's permanently off of the private market and owned by local and municipal governments or nonprofits. The concept that housing can and should be about community rather than commodity is foundational in its solution. But building and maintaining truly affordable housing and social housing isn't easy. It will require action at the local, state, and federal level. At the local level, it means making sure our land use laws allow for construction of affordable housing and that our landlords and developers aren't turning away potential tenants due to income or identity. At the federal level, we need investment. We need more resources dedicated to communities with the express intention of allowing for the development of more affordable housing. And it's important that we are explicit in naming the purpose of those funds. We need to fully fund the National Housing Trust Fund, the Housing Choice Voucher Program, and public housing. We also need more resources for tax credit programs that support and incentivize affordable housing development. And we need these funds to be focused on subsidizing housing for the lowest income tenants, because current subsidies leave those struggling the most locked out of housing options in Westchester County. We must also recognize and name the challenges of barriers to affordable housing development. At the federal level, we need to take steps to repeal the Faircloth Amendment to ensure that public housing can be built in every community in this country. Another key component is making moves to protect tenants from being priced out of their homes, which we know is particularly important in our district. In pockets of our district, like Yonkers, we're seeing the effects of rising rents and speculation. We're seeing displacement and eviction happen as a result. We need to expand the voucher program to ensure everyone can access housing where they want to, and in the process prevent voucher discrimination from landlords. Then we need to pass a good cause eviction nationally to make sure tenants aren't evicted for things that are no fault of their own or just because the landlord thinks they can get more rent out of a unit with a different tenant. The solutions are on the table, and we know that there is a path forward that will ensure housing has safe, affordable options in Westchester County and beyond. I believe that by working together, grassroots activists, local leaders, and members of Congress can push the envelope and finally deliver housing justice for all. I want to thank you all for being here today and for all of the work that you've done and will continue to do. Peace and love, everyone. Stay well.
Awesome. So glad that Congressman Bowman was able to contribute that. And he's mentioned a lot of things in there that I think we'll get to during the course of our discussion. So again, in our first webinar session, if some of you might not have been able to join us, we reviewed the history of racial segregation in housing and established that the county needs at least 11,700 new affordable units, and that the county's existing housing stock has 75,271 units that are either not affordable to the current inhabitants, are overcrowded, or are substandard. This is truly a crisis that we must address with urgency. But we also know that there is also land that for varying reasons is not suitable or buildable. Do we need a countywide buildable land assessment as well? Is it just a case of building new units, or is it a combination of solutions? This session of our webinar is going to talk about those solutions. That's the focus of the evening. And let's talk about some of what those solutions might be: helping people to afford their existing homes, end homelessness, create truly affordable units for people at all income levels, address the racial segregation in the county that is a result of centuries of systemic racism that continues today. And with that, I just want to make a ever so brief statement to touch on the elephant in the room, at least for me, which is yesterday's verdict on Derek Chauvin's murder of George Floyd, the case that we received the verdict yesterday. And I think that we cannot let that moment pass. We know that that was accountability rearing its head. We'd like to see more of it. And if there is truly justice, then we won't have to go through that type of situation ever again. So let's continue to work toward achieving justice. Our panelists this evening are uniquely qualified to help us address the concerns finding solutions to affordable housing in Westchester. We also want to hear what you in the audience think are solutions to the housing crisis. We are putting a link in the chat to what's called Jamboard. That is a real-time bulletin board where you can post and answer questions. And this evening's question is, what are the one or two most impactful things governments and/or grassroots organizers should do to solve our housing crisis? I'll repeat. What are one or two of the most impactful things that government or grassroots organizers and activists should do to solve our housing crisis? And you'll find the link in the chat. So now let's move on and introduce our panelists this evening. We have with us Rebecca Garrard. Do you want to just wave, Rebecca? Thanks. She's the manager of Housing Justice Citizen Action of New York. We also have Rich Nightingale. He's the Chief Executive Officer of WestHab. James Rouse, who is Director, Planning and Development for the Office of the Bronx Borough President. He also has a podcast called Planning and Organizational Visioning Podcast, which will be coming back soon, and hopefully we'll hear more about that. We have William Balter. He's the principal with Wilder Balter Partners that has been doing a lot of building of affordable housing here in Westchester. Rich McSpedden, business agent for Local 3 of the IBEW, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and is a member of the Westchester IDA, Industrial Development Agency. And last but not least, we have Vito Mundo. He's General Counsel, Joint Industry Board of the Electrical Industry. And we're glad to have all of you joining us this evening. So what I'd like to do, we talked about social housing. We heard that Congressman Bowman mentioned his opening line. So I'd like each of you, Rebecca, to start first, to give us an introduction webinar that we're holding and a perspective on solutions to the housing crisis.
Thank you, Joan. Yes, Congressman Bowman could not have set us up better for that question. Thank you so much. Honored to be here. I am Rebecca Garrard, she, her pronouns, campaigns manager for Housing Justice with Citizen Action. Citizen Action is an organization that has 8 chapters around the state. And so we work on housing on a statewide basis. I'm going to give a very short answer to a very complicated and in-depth question. But I'm going to talk about it in two ways. One is a sort of triage answer, right? We know we have a crisis that disproportionately impacts Black and Brown communities. And so in this moment, we need triage solutions. And so that really needs to look like increased tenant protections and increased regulations around rent rates so that we can start to preserve the stock we have and maintain the levels of rent being charged, and sort of stop the ballooning rents that are being charged, which have far outpaced wage increases and incomes. And then in a much more forward-thinking manner, our organization is very interested in long-term solutions, which don't lean into subsidizing private development, which has been the practice, but lean into funding community housing, social housing, through the lens of community land banks, residential cooperatives, tenant opportunity to purchase. We have got to a firm reinvestment in public housing. We have got to start increasing our housing stock that is community controlled and is not part of the free market if we're going to truly address what is really an epic crisis in Westchester, in the state, and in the country.
Thanks so much. Rich Nightingale of West Hab.
Thanks, Joan. Thanks to all the hosts tonight. Always happy to chat housing with 100 people that want to chat housing on a Wednesday night at 7 p.m. That is awesome. So I consider housing, the central social justice issue for our community because of its interconnectivity to so many other things. Yet somehow housing is not frequently dinner party conversation, if we remember what dinner parties were like a year ago. Housing is where your kids go to school. Housing is how home ownership is how you accumulate wealth and generational wealth that can be passed on to future generations that have been denied to so many people, mostly Black Americans and other non-white Americans for so many years. Very quickly, West Hab is a not-for-profit community development organization. We're headquartered in Yonkers. We're the largest not-for-profit provider of housing and services to the homeless in Westchester County. We're also the largest not-for-profit developer of affordable housing. So what makes West Hab a little bit unique is that we have clients and tenants that maybe start with West Hab in the shelter system. We have transitional housing programs, and we help tenants transition to permanent affordable housing, and also supportive housing, which is a very important tool that's part of this equation, which is housing for the formerly homeless and housing for special needs groups that really right sizes rent rather to income in the long run, and provides ongoing services to tenants so that they can sustain affordable housing for the long term. We also look, not only people need a roof over their head, but they need so much more than that. So in the communities where we provide housing, we also deliver after school programming, job training programs, and really look to uplift the whole community. I agree that Congressman Bowman outlined so many of the critical issues. I just want to say not one solution is going to get us there. We need to attack this issue with urgency that it deserves. And it includes building lots more housing, first and foremost, in my view, but also a whole number of solutions to keep people housed and to combat people being priced out of our community.
Great, thank you so much, Rich. Look forward to the discussion. James Rouse.
Sure, thank you, Joan. I'm James Rouse. I'm Director of Planning and Development in the Bronx Borough President's Office, just south of Westchester, but I can stake claim because I was born in New Rochelle and lived a year in Yonkers. I'm also the former president of the American Planning Association New York Metro chapter. And as mentioned, I have a podcast called Planning and Organizational Visioning, which will be getting back up soon. There's about a half dozen episodes available. I could put it in the chat if people are interested. It discusses primarily planning, sustainability, both environmental and organizational, and leadership. And also my consulting firm is called Planning Organizational Visioning as well. Social housing is a concept that's been around for a really long time, starting back, at least in America, with concepts such as like Sunnyside Gardens in Queens, where there were communal backyards to promote and foster good neighbors, to the union housing built in the 1930s and 40s, such as amalgamated houses and a lot of places on Lower East Side, to Mitchell-Lama and so on. So it's an ongoing concept, and it's tailored to meet the needs of the current generation and current crises of the day. And really, in my experience, one of the biggest ways to overcome that is getting the message out, getting the correct message out, and trying to overcome stigmas. Stigmas are a big obstacle to doing the basic, just trying to meet thresholds. Westchester County had trouble for many years from the federal decree trying to build affordable housing, and a lot of it was based around NIMBYism and the definition of what affordable housing is, which covers a wide range, ranging from very, very low income to moderate and middle income housing, rental, and home ownership. It's really about offering opportunities to people, and it's really it's dependent on the individual communities, what the need is. Homeownership might be a need in one place, but might not be a need in another place, where lower income rentals are more important. So getting the message out is really important, on top of overcoming, I said, stigmas and stereotypes and bias about what affordable housing is and what it means for your community.
Great. Thank you so much for that, James. Bill Balter.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for having me, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Glad to be on this panel with all of you. So Wilder Balter Partners has been around. I think we're just beginning our 4th decade, which is scary. We have focused in Westchester County, the Hudson Valley, Long Island, as far away as St. Thomas, and as far north, I guess, as Saratoga County. And it's interesting when I listen to the introduction and the discussion about sort of, especially what Rich said about it takes a lot of different approaches. And I think about social housing. I look at sort of our efforts recently in working on redoing public housing. And what I'm seeing more and more is that there's really a consensus about having tenants have more control. I think that's great. But I really think it does take, and that's one aspect of what I think is important. But when I look at what we've done for the last 3 decades, it's really been many, many, many different things. We've done developments that have included, 10% affordable housing, 25% affordable housing, 100% affordable housing, mixed income housing, and it has one theme, a couple of themes. First is we have to build consensus for what we do. In all of the developments we've done, I think we've had one lawsuit in more than 30 years. It's incredibly important to build consensus. You're just not going to be successful. We're past the time when you can battle this stuff out. You really need to build consensus. And the way to build consensus, a good example of that was what happened with Westchester County and the federal lawsuit. Once there was a mandate and communities understood something had to happen, it became a lot easier to build consensus. So I think that there needs to be a demand from the citizens who vote to elect people who put in places laws and policies that will make it easier for all of what we do. I also think that the funding sources matter. What Rebecca said about sort of their organization leaning toward public housing being more nonprofit based as opposed to private developer based, I think this actually makes a lot of sense as long as the funding sources work for that. By far, the single largest generator of multifamily and affordable housing in the United States since the late 70s has been the low-income housing tax credit. And in order for that to work, you need a private developer, you need a private entity that can use the tax credits. So you sort of have no choice. And I think what we're seeing now are more thoughtful approaches, especially on a local level, to how things can be done. But in order to really have this idea of social housing take root, I think what's going to have to happen is the funding programs are going to have to work for it. And the last thing I'll say is that I actually got an email a couple hours ago from another developer in Westchester County, sort of asking how we can do what we do with, in one community we're working in, where we're building 100% affordable housing. And my response, which I will write when I get off these calls tonight, is to basically say you have to sort of go for the low-hanging fruit, because there's such a need in so many ways for housing that if you can do 100% affordable housing and it's well thought out, great. If it needs to be 10% affordable, great. In New Rochelle, we're doing a 27-story high-rise that's 25% affordable at 50 and 75% of AMI, and the rest of it's got market rents. That's what worked there. It really takes an open mind, and it takes consensus, and it takes really the will of the people to elect people or politicians who are going to put in place policies that work.
Thank you so much, Bill. Let's hear from Rich McSpadden.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me, Joan.
Thanks for being here.
Am I batting cleanup here? Am I the last? This is easy when you get to do this. All the good answers are taken, right? Let me introduce myself, Rich McSpadden. I'm a business representative of Local 3, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. Like Joan had said, I am a board member of the Westchester County IDA, the Industrial Development Agency, as well as the Local Development Corporation, which is their non-for-profit sister. So they're parallel boards. Affordable housing, your question is, what was the question you had said? What are one or two of the most impactful things we could do to solve the issue?
Well, that was really more for our listeners, but yeah.
Yeah, I got you. It stuck with me. Once it's ringing in my head. One of the things that I don't think anyone has mentioned, I'll go kind of outside of the box here, is the term affordable housing. Affordable. What can you afford? And where does that lend itself? But wages. You can't talk about affordable housing without talking about income disparity and your income, your economic stability. We fight for minimum wage increases, and then we fight for living wages. But no one's talking about maximum wages. Why don't we have the fight where what's the maximum I can pay you to do this job? You see, if wages were here, maybe we wouldn't be having an affordable housing conversation. It would just be housing, because I could afford it. One is parallel to the other. They're side by side. I have an affordable housing crisis because people can't afford it because they don't have good quality jobs that pay good living, thriving wages, where a community, you can be part of a community and not have to deal with the stresses of affordable housing. There's probably nobody in all the statistics you had mentioned earlier, Joan, that isn't struggling with week-to-week paychecks. And I'm sure Rich Nightingale from West Ham knows it very well. He deals with that. He helps people get jobs. He helps trains them. But I challenge you, how to get that career job where you're stable and you can support a family with quality income, and then you have the stability of living in a home, not just a house or whatever the place may be. It really, in my mind, starts there. And then I always boil almost everything down to education, and it goes to your personal education, where that takes you, what ladder, what path it takes you, educating the community. I think Bill might have said that. No, it wasn't Bill. James? Can't see, right? I was mentioning educating everybody, different groups, different neighborhoods. Every chance you get, you have to educate everybody. And it's always a very difficult and not a simple solution. It has so many different facets to it. But I guess being the trade unionist that I am, I boil it down to that ability to earn a living. And in my mind, that comes with the stability of a career, a good paying a job with benefits and the ability to provide for your family, and not overstepping your bounds. What I mean by that is live within your means. A lot of people make poor financial decisions, you know, in all walks of life, right? And then all it takes is one bad year with the market to turn, and you know, those bad decisions are exposed. So I don't know. I think of it in terms of a true social problem, you know, that every community should be addressing. And like most problems, if you address it earlier on, it's not as big a problem. And that's where I think when we give people the opportunity to strong careers and we help support them throughout, they're stable, they're sustainable. That's where I'm going. Thank you. I don't know where else.
Thank you, Rich. And you don't have cleanup, actually. That distinction is
Oh,
going to Vito Mundo.
Oh, he's V, alphabetically. He's last.
Thank you. Thanks, Joan. First of all, I apologize to everybody. I unfortunately double booked, so I'm multitasking in a board meeting and stepping out now. I'm the general counsel for Leicester Housing Management. Rich, I thought you may touch on it, but not. The Leicester Housing is a housing development, affordable housing in Queens, in Flushing, Queens, actually built by the electrical industry. And we have 2,500 units of affordable housing. It started back in the idea came back in 1949 between labor and management, between the electrical industry, to join together to address the housing problem, as well as at that time, for our own benefit, address unemployment, because it put a lot of construction people to work. So they started the idea in 1949, and we broke ground in the early 50s. We are made up of 5 separate housing companies. They're all limited dividend co-ops under Article 4 of the housing company. And the way it works is that when a person comes in, they put down an equity deposit based upon the size of the apartment. They pay their regular monthly maintenance charges, but their maintenance charges basically includes everything but their TV and internet, which wasn't around back when they started it. But it covers your electric, your heating, your air conditioning, your water, your hot water. It's all included. And then when the person moves out, they would get their initial equity back minus whatever repairs are made on the building or on your unit. So they try to keep all of the units in good condition, so the next person taking over is getting, you know, a kitchen that has a good countertop that's not burnt or cracked, or doors on the cabinets that are broken or anything. And it was started as a way to give middle-class people affordable housing. We are governed by New York State. Everything we do has to be run by the state and get their approval. We do have an agreement with the state because of the way we built it, that through the electrical industry, that we're allowed to take in 5 electricians for everyone from the outside. So we have a list of people from the outside of Local 3, and we have the Local 3 list. So every sixth person is from the list from the outside, which is kept online by New York State. It initially was set up as 5 separate housing companies, 5 separate corporations. We've now taken over management and combined them. So they're all still separate companies. However, we have a management company, not-for-profit. We formed it ourselves, Leicester Management, which takes over the management of all 5 companies to keep it together. And it actually built a community. When they built it on the property, I guess going back in the 50s, it used to be a golf course. It was built as a whole community. We donated part of the property on the end of Harry Van Arsdale Jr. Avenue to New York City for a public school. So we have an elementary school there right on the property. We built a shopping center across the street. It's a typical, strip mall of 10 or 12 stores, our supermarket, the cleaners, the pizzeria, all the necessities. So everybody built it as part of their own community, and they formed their own baseball teams and their activities for the kids. So they've built a community, auxiliary police forces there, and everything all from the community. So it started out as an effort just to provide affordable housing, which it still does. It also built into a whole community for people to work together, to protect each other, to talk to each other, and to live as a family, which is what it is now. We fight very hard to keep our costs down. And it's still a fairly affordable place for people to live. If your income is over a certain amount, Then the monthly maintenance goes up. It's governed by the state, so kept it as affordable housing. So that's just the general background of Electchester, and it's similar to a Mitchell-Lama type housing, but it's a little different as an Article 4 housing. The way we originally funded it also was the pension funds put up additional money as loans to get it started. And then they sold bonds to members of Local 3, $100 bonds, and raised the money. And that's how they did the construction, by raising money themselves, paying the bonds back with 3% interest. But it was able to generate enough money at that time that they were able to construct the buildings.
I'm sorry, Rich, that's really fascinating, Vito. And let me just ask a couple of questions of Vito before he has to jump back to his other board meeting. How many units total is Electchester?
Just under 2,500, 2,480 or 90, something like that, just under it. And it goes from 3 bedrooms, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms.
Okay. And I'm sorry, Rich McSpadden, did you want to say something?
Sure. Just, I did a little research on it too, because the history for me, I lived there for a while, about 3 years. I had a 1-bedroom, Vito, in second housing. And part of the 103 acres that were bought, part of the golf course, some of that land was donated for Pominock Housing for NYCHA. And if I'm not mistaken, that's 35 buildings they built there, housing 2,100 apartments there, or families are there. They built a library. Public library is in the facility, as well as, and maybe you can correct me, the 107th precinct, I believe that property was also part of the.
No, that's right across the street from us. I think that was separate, but that was across the street. So police precinct now built a new precinct 5 years ago, Rich, 10 years ago tops.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And as Rich said, right across the street from us is Pominock City Housing, that the industry donated the property for the city.
So, so this goes to how you make a project like that happen. Back in 49, early 50s, Harry Van Arsdale, you had to work both sides of the aisle there. And it wasn't such a binary world back then. We weren't so split and separate. We were more centered. And you were able to work with everybody, and you realized all that benefits everybody. The city got a lot out of it. They got a park. There's a public park over on 164th Street, if I'm not mistaken. That's an open playground. That part of this purchase donated to the city, as well as the middle school, the library, and public housing, with plenty of green space. The way it's designed, it's tree lined, paths between buildings, open space. Not terribly high. Most of the buildings are 6 stories, a few 3-story buildings, and then 2 towers. I don't know how tall they are. Are they 18 stories?
I think it's 18.
That's
Yeah. Those are the newest ones built.
Single court.
Yeah, so let me open this up to the other panelists, because there's a lot of discussion. We're talking about social housing. Mitchell-Lama is another example of that. Co-op City is another example of that. Is something like Electchester possible today? Are we seeing that? Rich Nightingale, how do those compare?
I'll do my best here. This isn't, I don't have experience with this exact type of project. What I will say is anything is possible in housing with leadership and vision. I mean, when you look at any piece of land and you try to find the highest and best use for it, typically you're going through a process with a local municipality to say, hey, we want to do this. We want to build 1 million units of this, or we want to build a bowling alley, or we want to build, whatever you want to build, and you're going through a land use process. What makes Westchester particularly tricky in some ways is that you're talking to 47 different municipalities in Westchester County. The rules in Yonkers are completely different than the rules in New Rochelle, than the rules in Chappaqua and Scarsdale, right? And, so many of the communities in Westchester do not have the kind of zoning that allows for density. You'll never reach affordability without some level of density. You'll never, build the economies of scale to make something work. This is just kind of off the top of my head, but there are large residential campuses, old foster care campuses that are closing in Westchester right now. There are organizations that are, recentering their efforts in New York City. I know of 3, myself. They are, 50-acre plus campuses. So could something like this happen? Absolutely, it could. Does it feel like the climate today is ready for it? It absolutely does not. And there's a lot of work to be done to create an environment. Think about what Bill was saying earlier. How do you build consensus around something? Let me go back to something else I'm seeing in the chats, which is we have a starting hurdle of dispelling many myths about affordable housing. When people hear affordable housing, there's an enormous stigma attached. It's a synonym to low income, and it's also a synonym to things that are complete myths, that my property values are going to go down, that somehow, crime and overuse of community facilities, is going to go up. The current area median income in Westchester County right now for a family of 4 is about $125,000. So much of what's talked about as affordable may be households earning $75,000 a year, and far below. And obviously West Hab seeks to serve very far below. But these are working people that are contributing in massive ways to our community. For the last year, we talked about essential workforce, and we thanked nurses and nurses' aides and grocery store workers. Then we put them back on the bus to go to Putnam County to sleep at night, if they could even afford there after their second shift, somewhere else. So really, just from a starting point, the general public in Westchester County really doesn't understand the economics, and that when we talk about affordable housing, we're talking about the backbone of our communities, our local workforce. Building affordable housing in Westchester is an economic necessity. We have a lot of hurdles to climb before we're going to get to an Electchester, but I hope we're all here to do it. So lots of solutions along the way while we try to dream big in that way.
Thank you. And Rebecca, how do we start organizing for that?
Yeah, thank you for calling on me, right? And I hear the consensus building, I do, right? My position, I think, is slightly different than most others on the panel, right? I think back to our historic wins of 2019 when the housing movement took on the Real Estate Board of New York. And it was people power versus money and influence. And we won, right? And so part of what's really important to us at Citizen Action is shifting the narrative. And so I think we have a responsibility as a society, as communities, and elected officials have a responsibility as policymakers, even if it's not always popular in their districts, to prioritize those whose voices are less amplified in their communities or given less priority in their communities. And the reality is, yes, all those examples you gave, Rich, 100%, right? The nurses, the grocery store workers. And then going beyond that, right? We have people who aren't at 80% AMI or 70% AMI or 60% AMI. We have people who are cleaning the houses of the wealthiest of the wealthy. We have people who are on disability, right? And every single person in a community deserves housing. That's a right. And it is the responsibility of that community to provide it to them. Period. End of story. Period. End of story. And so the conversation really needs to be around how are we going to do that, and not around whether it's earned or justified or right. That's just flawed. And an example I often give when we have this pushback about subsidies or these conversations is, it's really ironic to me when we think about vouchers or subsidized housing or any of these sort of social safety nets that are given to people who are on the lower income spectrum, that there's a sort of shame attached to it. But we have any wealthy CEO or any person of great means who takes advantage of any tax credit they get and any subsidy they can get, and they're viewed as a smart and savvy business person, right? So we've got to stop. We've really got to shift the narrative and start looking at these safety nets as what they are, which is supports from the government that are needed and deserved and earned by these people, and not a handout. So how do we organize around it, right? Shift the narrative, demand housing for every single person in a community. And I just want to go back to a couple of things. Going back to the low-income housing tax credit, somebody made an excellent point in the chat, right? That can be paired up with not-for-profit housing developers. And I also want to point out that there are lots of other tax credits that municipalities give that can be utilized in other ways, right? You look at 401A, 421A, and its upstate counterpart, which gives tax subsidies for a decade, right, to convert commercial housing to mixed use housing. And outside of New York City, there's no affordability requirement attached to it. Municipalities could be using so many of the tax incentives that they utilize for a host of investments in social housing. It's just a reimagining of our municipality resources. And I know we're going to go on to talk about some protections that I'm going to very excitedly talk about, but I'll sort of pause there.
Great. Thank you. And Bill, I want to hear from you next, but just as a reminder, can we repost the link for the Jamboard in the chat? Folks are wanting to throw some things in there. So Abe, if you wouldn't mind doing that. Thanks. And so Bill, you have been quite successful in being able to develop correct?
I'm sorry, you cut out.
I was just, you have been able to develop mixed in Peekskill.
Yes, so where to start? So to answer your question directly, in about 5 or 6 years ago, the federal government changed one of the rules for low-income housing tax credit funding, and states followed, as did Westchester County. It used to be that when you used the tax credit, you had to do all of your units at 60% of AMI or less, and you need to follow the rules. You don't get the funding. They changed that a few years back to allow income averaging, which is really a lot healthier for communities and frankly more embraced by communities in my experience. So at Chappaqua Crossing in Chappaqua, we did a development that used income averaging, and we have incomes there from 40% of AMI and $800 a month up to market rate units that are $6,000 a month. So it's a huge broad range that was fostered partially by income averaging. In Peekskill, that development is also income averaged, and I think that helped to make it more acceptable. There we have rents from $900 a month up to $2,500 a month, from 40% to 80% of AMI. But I want to just go back to something that is really most basic element to me, and that is, it's sort of a high-class problem to me. What do you do when you have the opportunity to build all of this affordable housing? How do you choose to do it? Is it social housing? What do you do with it? I really do think the bigger problem is changing the chessboard so that there's just the opportunity to do more housing, any housing. It takes all kinds. A great example in Westchester County was the Berenson case of 35 or 40 years ago that really said, it said that communities are required to provide their fair share, for the fair share of housing needs in the county, in the region rather, in their town. So that, and that was part of what happened with the federal lawsuit with the county that created the enabling legislation. So I still think this is much more, first and foremost, about changing the landscape so that communities don't have a choice and they have to embrace the housing. It's a right, and it's been established long ago, literally decades ago, but so little has been done with that to make that a prevalent way to get units approved in Westchester County.
Joan, if I could jump in for 1 minute. There
Yeah,
was a question
please.
about the racial diversity at Electchester. And obviously back in the 50s when it was built, it was predominantly local 3 electricians, and it was predominantly Caucasians that lived there. Right now, it's a very racially diverse environment. You have Caucasians, you have African Americans, you have Latinos. It's spread across to everything. And I think one of the things that makes it successful, and I think any development to make it successful nowadays, two things. One, the ownership interest, and two, keeping people involved. So they have an interest in it. It's, rental properties, people think it's all the landlord's problem. We don't have to worry about it and they could abuse it or whatever. Leicester, we have a lot of, and it follows Local 3's initiatives on things where a lot of clubs and a lot of organizations. So they have, different groups that'll, whether they run a street fair to raise money to rebuild the parks or put money into the children's playgrounds and things. But everybody has a sense of ownership and a sense of responsibility, and it's not just pushed off to somebody else. So the racial diversity is, definitely we have a full diverse population, but they all have an interest in it and they keep it well maintained and join together as a group, as a community.
Thank you for answering that question, Vito. And I'd like to sort of get back to the idea of ownership as being, part of this recipe. But James, I wanted to get you in here to talk about what you're hearing from a planning perspective.
Oh, absolutely. And I want to touch upon a couple of things that both Richard and Rebecca said. I started off talking about getting the word out, breaking down stigmas, having a good message to talk about what affordable housing really is. And one thing you said, Richard, was regarding property values. And, this is an issue in the wealthiest neighborhoods and even the poorest neighborhoods, is property values, because what is this going to do to my community? And we do not do a good enough job getting that message out. The Bronx, in New York City, we get about 60% of the housing programs, the funding that's available when the city does affordable housing, because land is quote unquote cheaper in the Bronx, that we get a good chunk of the affordable housing that's built. Even so, in certain communities and groups like West Hab, for example, that does work in both Westchester and the Bronx, and they do supportive housing. And when you say supportive housing to people, immediately it's, people with problems. We had one community board, and the Bronx has what's called community boards, if you're not familiar with it, which are advisory community-led boards that advises in the land use process and other decisions. One of the community boards, which happened to be a very poor community board, when a couple of supportive housing developers came saying, hey, look, we want to build some supportive housing here, the response is, we already have enough methadone clinics and shelters. And it's like, well, this is not that. If anything, it will reduce the number of methadone clinics and shelters in the neighborhood, because these are for people that need help. Yes, it is in some cases, former drug abusers, formerly homeless, but it's also, like I always say, think of your grandmother with dementia. Think of your uncle with Alzheimer's. Those are the same people that these programs serve. And it's the same thing with just general low-income housing, is that you have to get the message out that, you love the janitor at your job. When you need to go to White Plains, that really joyful county clerk that's there. It's like, well, they happen to be married and actually fall into the low income category with their combined income. But when it comes to, you open up the newspaper saying, they're going to build lower income housing in my community, I don't want that. It's like, these are the people that we're offering these opportunities to. So it's just trying to make that connection with that stigma. And Rebecca, you were talking about folks needing to commute long distances. We find that in the Bronx. We're actually building, 4 new Metro North stations to connect to the New Haven line. And a lot of the folks in the Bronx utilize Metro North for jobs up in Westchester and Connecticut. And it's a lot of the jobs that you were talking about, just, the nanny, the gardener, the maintenance worker who's rehabbing the home. And personal one-on-one interactions, these are, these are people you get along with, you can have a conversation. But when you talk about offering them opportunities, that's where the gap is. And I think there's a big misunderstanding of what's represented there. And it's really unfortunate, because we like to talk about creating aspirational communities, people who can live in a neighborhood, raise their families, and then their children or them can do better and not have to leave the neighborhood. But we have to offer those opportunities in the first place. And when there are obstacles through stigmas such as this, it creates a huge difficulty to get it done. And it's part of it is offering a diverse range of affordable housing, and importantly, to include the community, not only that exists, but also to target the community. A lot of times when we have these conversations, the communities that we serve aren't always represented. And just being quite blunt, even in this panel, it's not as representative as certain communities could be to talk about affordable housing. And it's not just race, it's not just class, we're talking gender, LGBTQ.
Yep.
We really need to look at making housing culturally appropriate that serves the needs. It's not just a numbers game. Just because low-income housing tax credits give you the best bang for your buck at 60% of AMI, just because you want to build, 11,000 units, and the quickest way to do that is build a bunch of studios, that's not really addressing the need out there. And so we really need to talk to the communities that we are trying to serve, and try to utilize what they're telling us to overcome these stigmas and get done what needs to get done.
Right. And if I can jump in, and so forgive me, I'm having connectivity myself, so forgive me if I black on my screen, but Rebecca was making that point as well. We have to change the way people think about housing. Affordable home, definition of affordable housing varies depending on who you're talking to. So thank you for that, Jane. Rich McSpadden, and again, I might black out here in a second, but you're a member of the Westchester IDA. What role do you see the IDA playing? Because we understand that this is, a specific municipality issue because of zoning laws, but the county IDA can play a role.
Sure. So there's 6 IDAs in the county. Westchester County is one of them. Yonkers, Mount Vernon, New Rochelle, Mount Pleasant, and Peekskill all have IDAs. Any municipality that doesn't would fall under Westchester County's IDA. One of the things we're seeing, and I think James just mentioned it, building a lot of studios. A lot of the projects that come before the IDA are typically studio, 1-bedroom, very few 2-bedroom. All of them, because the way the law is structured, have to be rental units. And so because of that, the developers have come back in the last several years where they have originally designed 3 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 1s. They're not selling. They can't rent them. And so they've redesigned them to more 1-bedroom and studios with a few 2 bedrooms in there. And you can't grow. A family can't grow into that. You're limited in what you can do. And like Vito had said, there's no ownership there. But that falls on the state to change some of the laws on what we as an IDA can do. The developer's not going to come to us for these incentives because they can't build co-ops and get our incentives. They can build co-ops and not get our incentives, but when you're looking to adjust it, we could make requirements of the developer to get our incentives, to get the tax incentives programs. We could ask them, and we typically start with a 10% benchmark. 10% of your units have to be affordable housing, and we typically go for 80% AMI or under. We prefer it to be in that 40 to 63%. That seems to be the biggest gap that's needed. I think those numbers vary a little bit, but I believe it's.
And if I could interrupt you, AMI means area median income.
Right, and I forgot who had mentioned it earlier. I think it was for a family of 4, 125,000 in Westchester. I believe that was the number. Mm-hmm. That changes a little bit. Our IDA has to use the Westchester County area median index. Any other IDA uses their local area median index. So what it would be in Peekskill, Yonkers, Mount Vernon, and oh, Portchester has one. I forgot Portchester. Sorry, Joan.
Yeah, but Portland uses the counties.
So they use our statistics.
Yes,
yeah.
they do.
Okay. So those are the numbers they have to use. Density, for them to be profitable, the other problem is that they need to get so many units in to a certain size lot, and they need to get the market rate for X amount of units for this to be profitable for them. There's a big expense and exposure to these developers. I understand that, and they'd like a return. One of the other problems we'd like to see is if you build a whole affordable housing project, there's a different set of tax incentives you could use, and the developer could take advantage of that. But when we limit or ask them to do 10% of it, he can only get so much tax incentivized money for that project. And there's a struggle to find that balance of what we could ask them. And we're both restricted. What the state will let us do as an IDA, what they could ask for as a developer. Some developers that we've spoken to would love to do all 100% affordable. And then it'd be a lot easier for them, because then they could request certain other tax incentives that would help them get it through 2 different programs. Kirby Commons came up. I don't know if you read that this week. That's in Mount Kisco as a project by the train station. Not much in the way of requirements for affordable housing. I wish it was more. I think it was 7% of the project, but that was shot down. We thought it was going to go through. We thought the pulse of the community was that it was going to be welcomed. But after several months, if not a year, maybe it's been a year, that all changed. And part of this is public education. So what I've learned, and I think you understand, Joan, and I know Mike Yellen, working with Mike and New Rochelle, by the time the community wakes up to what's going on, the process is it's steamrolled, it's done. There's shovels in the ground, there's steel coming up, and somebody's kind of going, what's that going to be? Or why is that here? And people have busy lives. I think they only pay attention to what's important to them at the moment, and they don't look down the road a little bit more.
Sure.
For me, working where I work and doing what I do, I have 4 kids. And, like many of us, you wonder, well, they couldn't have, I don't know if they're going to be able to afford to live here where we grew up when it's their turn to raise a family. So you struggle with that now, and you start having conversations like this tonight. My kids are in the back of my mind. Part of this is for them, the next generation. What's it going to be like for them?
Rich, thank you for that, Rich. And I want to go back to Rich McNightingale for a moment to weigh in on some of those challenges from your perspective. You don't just build in Yonkers, you build around the county.
Yeah, I have a couple hundred comments as people are talking here, but I'm totally going to try to behave. I know we're probably all feeling that way. Let me just say a couple clarifying items on a couple things. So when we build wholly affordable housing in Westchester, and Bill touched on this earlier, with different income, blends, one of our specialties, as I mentioned, was combining supportive and affordable. Every mix is a little bit different. And I know, Rich McSpadden, you just said sometimes the market rate developers can't fill larger units. You can fill every affordable unit. There are thousands of applicants for every unit of affordable housing. It is a sad reality that winning a housing lottery is like winning the real lottery in our community. There's often in New York City, for a 50-unit building, there could be 60,000 applicants, into a lottery. So there is unlimited demand for affordable housing, which proves the point that we all know that there's so much unmet need. But what I was going to say is, when we build in Yonkers, let's say we want to build 100% affordable development, which we're doing now, we are following the county's AMI, even though Yonkers AMI is about half of Westchester. So to be building 60% of Westchester's AMI isn't truly meeting the need in Yonkers. And you'll see residents walk by a development and see the rents or see the flyer, the rental flyer, and say, affordable to whom? You know, this is 60 and 80% of 125K. What is that? So there are two very different things that are going on in Westchester. One is inclusionary housing or mandated inclusionary housing, where a town says anyone that builds a large multifamily building here needs to do 10% affordable or needs to do X. And that is, I think, a lot of what's coming to the IDA is a market rate developer, a luxury developer who's trying to fit something that they're not used to in their building, or something, they want to get the most rent they can and take on a big mortgage and cash flow a beautiful building. When we build 100% affordable, it is a totally different financing. It is a totally different structure. So those are two very different things. And I think sometimes communities say, well, we just want to mix. If everyone did 5% affordable, then we wouldn't have to have these standalone affordable buildings. The reality in Westchester is that's not going to get us there. First of all, so many communities have not historically done anything. So we need some wholly affordable. So a group like West Hab can underwrite it completely differently, can blend in supportive housing that totally shatters the AMI scale and serves the formerly homeless and serves people 10, 20, 30% of AMI. It is better for all of us when the nurse's aide lives down the street, when the other nurse's aide calls out sick and can hustle over and fill that shift. It is to no one's benefit that you never run into your kid's school teacher or even a police officer, in the grocery store, right? So, I don't mean to, do that in such a kind of soapbox way, but the other piece that we're missing on the marketing, and we talked about this a lot, James talked about it as well, in terms of branding affordable housing. I'm so proud of where affordable housing is going. The kind of stuff West Hab's building, the kind of stuff Wilder Baldur's building is beautiful. It has market rate finishes. We're building affordable housing right now with electric car charging stations, with bike rooms, with outdoor space, with community rooms. Actually, because affordable housing is such a heavily regulated space, we're building some of the greenest buildings in the entire community. And there are unbelievable innovations that are creating beautiful housing. So I think every community should absolutely have inclusionary policies. I think they should do away with payment in lieu and all these options that developers have to skirt their responsibilities, but there has to be a lane for wholly affordable developments built by folks that know how to do that work and can build those buildings to a beautiful quality level and can meet a need that nobody else can meet.
Thank you. And I see Rebecca nodding, so I want to bring you into this discussion, Rebecca.
Thank you. Yeah. And I really want to actually segue into some tenant protections that I think are enormously important in the context of this. But before I do that, I want to just sort of plus one to Richard's point about there just being an absolute necessity for buildings that are solely affordable and not just inclusionary. And plus one, something James said before about really having planning be driven by community feedback. That's something that we're striving to do in Albany and really hoping to see become a pattern across the state. It is flawed from the start if we're presuming that we know what communities need instead of asking communities what they need. So just wanted to lift both those comments up. Yeah, in the context of all this, I just think we can't miss the moment to talk about tenant protections. I'm actually, I think we all know what ETPA and rent stabilization is. This is Westchester. It's not new to Westchester. We have to talk about strengthening people's ability to use vouchers and holding landlords accountable to accepting them and creating systems that meet the gap, right, between what a voucher is worth and what housing costs. But I really, because we're running short on time, really just want to talk about good cause eviction protections because I think it speaks so much to what we're talking about. It does two things and it relates to some things that were named in the chat. Someone had no, actually, I think it was you, Joan, right, who mentioned that, or somebody mentioned in the start that there is not just a lack of stock in terms of numbers, but there's a percentage of housing stock in Westchester which is substandard, right?
Yeah,
which
that
is
was in the
substandard.
opening.
And
Yep.
I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that it is It is inhabited by the most marginalized, low-income residents in Westchester, and I'm going to go out on a limb and guess too that they're predominantly tenants of color. And so what happens is tenants cannot complain about these conditions, right? They cannot advocate for repairs because they can be on the receiving end of a no-fault eviction, of a holdover eviction. Because in this state, you can be paying your rent, you can be fulfilling all the obligations of your tenancy, and a landlord has the right at the end of the lease, or most of the time in these situations, it's a month-to-month tenancy, to simply give you the appropriate notice, be it 30, 60, or 90 days, and you can go on your way. And when we think about a lack of supply like we're talking about here, a landlord knows that they can easily get somebody else in, and they have no fear in doing that. So until, first of all, we demand that a landlord has to have cause to evict a tenant, we are always going to ensure that predatory landlords are able to prey on the most vulnerable tenants in our communities because they can, right? And they can do it very profitably by disinvesting in homes and extracting money from these properties. The other thing it does, and I want to talk about like the new development and the market rate in the inclusionary zoning and the redlining. The other way that no-fault evictions are used, right, is to gentrify neighborhoods. You know, we talk about bringing new housing in, and whether it's just new luxury housing that's developed, or whether it's inclusionary zoning where we have some degree of affordability, right? But then we have market rate apartments, right, which are priced at whatever the market can bear. So we know that some developers will just buy a building that perhaps had some quasi-affordable housing and just clear it out, right, to convert it to more luxury housing. No-fault eviction is used in that case. That would be stopped. The other thing good cause eviction does is it equates a rent increase above 1.5 times the consumer price index of a region to a no-fault eviction. And so that is so enormously important in like stopping the gentrification of areas, because when we see this development come in, right, and I saw somebody say there's still redlining, right, in Westchester, there's still redlining across this whole state and country. When we still have these disinvested pockets, which are almost always inhabited by people of color, and then, you know, development will start to eyeball it, right, and even the community electeds will say, oh, well, you know, let's bring resources and development to this area. It never ends up being for the benefit of the people that live there. It simply displaces them, because as soon as development comes in and as soon as resources come in, since we don't have any cap on what rents can charge, all of a sudden units that haven't improved in condition at all, right, just because of proximity to something shiny that's next door, or some new building that's been converted down the block, rents are increasing. And so instead of communities of color being able to actually benefit from resources after generations of historic disinvestment, they are simply displaced and gentrified by it. And so, you know, Westchester's so far in on the gentrification game, but it's, you know, we have to have these protections to sort of triage the market rates where they are, and to ensure that any community that is still redlined and suffering from that lack of investment might actually be able to benefit from it.
Thank you so much.
And I just want to, I'm so sorry, that is
Yeah.
a state level piece of legislation, but it can also move at the municipality level. Albany is moving it right now. It's the first municipality in the state.
Cool. And so being mindful of the time, hopefully folks who are on the call have posted their answers to what are two things that can be done by governments and or community members that would have the biggest impact towards solving a housing crisis, so that we can throw up the Jamboard after we're done. But I wanted to move on to some questions that some of you are seeing in the chat. I mean, we're seeing some really great questions. One question I'm seeing is, what county and municipality do now care for expected federal investment in affordable and low-income housing, right? So we know that the American Rescue Plan was signed into law. We know that there is going to be money set aside for infrastructure, which includes housing. So what can county municipalities do now to prepare for sort of that influx of funds? Does anybody want to, any one of our panelists want to jump in on that one?
I'll just say one thing about that. As happened in 2008 with the stimulus money back then, there's will be a priority on projects that are ready to go. And, you know, the good news is things will get built. The bad news is the communities that typically resist it, nothing is ready to go because the projects, there's no zoning, the things aren't getting done. But to take advantage of that, Westchester County and municipalities, you really need to have projects that are ready to go.
Rich?
Rich, you're muted.
Rich Nightingale. Yes, I have two.
Yeah, I wasn't sure which Rich you meant there. You know, I think, you know, obviously when government is spending, when something is ramped up so quickly, it is like the details need to be sorted for some time to come. I certainly agree with Bill. I also know there's a lot of money in some of the stimulus programs for eviction prevention, which is absolutely critical, not adding housing units, but you know, there has been an eviction moratorium for the last year, as there should have been during a global pandemic. But it's interesting, you know, we're a social service not-for-profit. We're also a landlord, and it's very difficult when nobody pays the rent for a year. So there are both sides of that issue. So it is great that a lot of rental assistance will be coming into communities to help, you know, tenants stay in the housing they're already in. There should be no, you know, the eviction moratorium is going to end at some point, but hopefully that doesn't mean that there's an avalanche of evictions. Hopefully that, you know, folks are able to seize the funds to stay in their homes. I know there is a kind of a big movement right now to look at housing as infrastructure, so that as federal money pours into infrastructure, we recognize that's not just highways and bridges, but housing is really the backbone of our community's infrastructure. I think, you know, we're still waiting to see some of the details. You know, do government RFPs come out in particular areas? But, you know, I agree with Bill. I mean, I'm very much on the production side. We need more housing. You know, like we can talk about a million things. We need housing. We need density to achieve that housing. And, you know, it would be great if we had 100 shovel-ready projects ready to go. So if funds come, they can move. We don't because there's so many obstacles to developing in Westchester. There are such prolonged battles over affordable housing that's not, you know, even if we had a blank check today, that doesn't mean we could accomplish the, you know, the goal.
Bill, did you want to add anything to that, to Rich Nightingale's comments?
No, I mean, I agree with Rich. I think more broadly, we are in a moment, you know, when you spoke about the verdict yesterday, about yesterday's verdict, I do think we're at a moment. I think, as someone said before, there's an awareness of how important nurses and everyone took care of us for the past year are that I don't think was there before. You know, for decades, literally, people have been wanting to not approve anything in Westchester, and then at the same time, those same people complain about all the traffic on the roads coming in and out of Westchester County because the people that teach their kids have to drive an hour and a half to get to the schools. People that work for their families and their houses have to drive. Now, it's just amazing how there's a disconnect between with the same people who don't want affordable housing, who also don't want traffic, and they just don't want change. And I think we're at a moment where there's a chance to have a real paradigm shift and get a lot more understanding from a lot more people.
Thank you. And so, you know, we talk about folks who have to drive distances to get to work, that they can't live in the communities in which they work. So what might be some effective solutions to combat that not in my backyard? You know, part of the marketing for this webinar series was getting to a point of yes in my backyard. So how do we begin to dismantle that?
Joan, if I could say one more thing here,
Sure.
quickly.
Yep.
you know, you have about 100 people who tuned in tonight that are passionate about this issue. I've been on many panels, you know, recently on the same thing. You know, I believe in a lot of ways there is a silent majority in Westchester that does want to embrace change. That is probably not the population that goes to zoning board meetings that go until 10, 11 o'clock at night. Single parents, people working 2 jobs, are not the people that end up in that room when the real stuff is happening there. You know, so there are 47 different municipalities in Westchester making decisions. Probably every single one of them has a planning board and a zoning board, and these are appointed positions, and they have unbelievable control over what happens to a piece of land in that town. So if you live in Scarsdale or Harrison, where I live, which is one of the worst offenders in Westchester County, or Irvington, or all the, you know, all these places, getting on a planning board, getting on a zoning board, and getting into the DNA of your town, you know, to make change, that, you know, I think it's one of the most frustrating things, you know, that sometimes is not understood. The mayor themselves, him or her, does not make, you know, the ultimate decision. They may appoint zoning board members. The state doesn't make decisions. It's being handled at a very local level. And I think we've seen a long history that if it's allowed to be handled at the local level in Westchester, the status quo will be perpetuated. And there will be many communities that remain completely non-diverse and, to be fair, completely on purpose.
Right. Being able to go to those meetings is a luxury, right, of time that many people don't have. So does anyone else want to jump in on that particular discussion?
Well, I might just comment on, you said, what could be done? I think you need to find a leader. You need to find one municipality that's willing to take that first step forward. That's almost shovel ready, and show and lead by example. This is what we did. This is the project. Here it is. Take a look at it. This diffuses all the myths. This is fine. This worked out well. You could do it too. Sometimes it just takes one person to take that leap of faith forward and to make it happen. And but to everyone's point, to your point, Richard, it's the process is painstaking, and it's too tedious for some people to just to grind it out, and that's part of the problem, is that grind. The public doesn't want to deal with it, and a lot of people have to get reelected, and they don't want to deal with it, and so they just kick the can down the road. You need to find that one person that's willing to make this their battle, and then we need to use it as an example.
John, can I add to that?
Please, yeah.
So in Peekskill, Mayor Rainey was a champion for the mixed income development we're doing in their downtown. And I don't think he cared if he got reelected or not. He was so passionate about that and other things. And I think, as Rich said, the fact that people have to get reelected is a problem. And I think that is a real thing. The other thing Rich said that I also agree with is that after doing this for 30 years, we now have communities that look at what we did at, whether it's in North Salem or in Cortland or in Larchmont or wherever, and they see what we did, and they see these communities that are gorgeous, that do not look like quote unquote affordable housing, and they want one of those for their community. I'm finally seeing that they're examples of communities that understand they have a need and they want something that we're doing in other places. I think, as we've all talked about, educating the population is so incredibly important. I think that having the laws like Berenson and others is important. Having people understand that they want the people that essentially make up the infrastructure of their lives, all of the people that live in this housing, they want them to have a place to live that they don't have to drive so far. Having those people understand what the housing really looks like, who really lives there. It all, to me, is to a great extent about education and sort of pulling from our toolkit, not just in Westchester, but in other places where it's been done successfully. There are so many examples, yet when I am at a planning board meeting at 12 at night, the vocal minority of the people speaking up, not the silent majority. And that is just such a huge problem. So you take an organization like that's sponsoring this tonight, and all of us spending time on this, and the people in the audience, none of them sort of use their voice to come make a difference at these meetings. And maybe part of what has to happen is there needs to be much more organization so that we get a lot more folks to come out to meetings, so that the people who might vote against it understand that it isn't the majority, it's just a vocal minority of people speaking.
Thank you for that, Bill. What I'd like to do, and thank you all of you for your participation this evening. I am going to ask Abe Baker Butler, who has been doing our tech for us this evening, if he can throw up the Jamboard so that we can see some of the comments, the responses to our question about what two things can government and organizers and activists do to change housing laws in the county. So Abe, are you able to do that?
Certainly can, Joan. Here it is.
Awesome.
Wow, wow.
Okay. So we've got a few things. Not why I'm hearing an echo.
How do I make this big?
If there's a particular area where you'd like me to zoom in, I can. But there's so much to take in here, right?
There's a lot.
Right.
There's a lot to take in.
All right.
And I'm not sure why, Babe, do you know why there's a reverb or?
So I'm working on seeing why there's a reverb. I think if everyone who's not speaking can mute, that would solve the reverb.
Okay. So I see one of these local home rule and zoning rules on density are problematic. And so we know that there's a patchwork of zoning rules based on municipalities. So there is sort of any one blanket approach to that. It has to be by municipality by municipality. Which might make it difficult for organizers to approach that. I don't know, Rebecca, if you have a comment about that.
Which piece? I'm sorry. I was having. We're all echoing.
You were all echoing. That's odd.
You know what my comment I want to make is, and forgive the echo, but I'm looking at all of these post-its, and I'm feeling like here's 180 now, but 100 people originally look like exactly the people that you need to organize to speak up at your meetings. Because I'm reading these post-its, I'm feeling very, very good about these solutions that are being put. Have been put on this Jamboard. Oh, I stopped.
Yeah, we stopped. Yeah, awesome.
I'm so sorry, but what was your
So in terms of organizing, if we're looking at organizing community by community, municipality by municipality, that's a huge undertaking.
Yeah.
Based upon the municipality's ability to do that, right? Mm-hmm. Do you have some recommendations, sort of a basic approach that some communities can take?
Yes, I mean, I think it could be done in a couple of ways, right? It can be done locationally. So if we know that there are people who live in either low income housing or affordable housing, whatever label we want to give it, right? Also, another way to do it locationally is job locations, right? Where we know people are lower wage earners. Really just going and flyering. So whether it's flyering for a community meeting to start organizing, let's meet at the library this evening, right? To talk about what housing solutions look like and have a listening session. And then that leads up to, right, getting people to gather and give feedback at the municipality level, town meetings, village meetings, right? City meetings, whatever iteration that takes. So that could be, right, the location level. It could be standing at places, right, where services are provided to people who have, and tabling outside places where services are provided to low income people, or people on the low wage spectrum. So whether that's, food banks, whether that's any other sort of social net kind of places. But meet people where they are, right? It's actually really not that difficult if we think about it, and have a meeting. Given that it's COVID, have a Zoom meeting, right? These are our new organizing techniques, right? We can digitally organize. And just start listening, right? What are the impacts people are feeling? Document them, right? What does it look like by region? Are there common bad players in their housing situation in terms of landlords or certain rules and laws that are really impacting them? And organize to change those things and empower people, right? And do leadership development and political education so that people can be not a silent majority, but a really vocal, powerful majority.
I think Joan might be frozen for a second. I was going to ask if I could get a word in, so I might just take the moment.
Yes, Rich, go for it.
Seize the moment.
I was just going to say very quickly, as I know we're running out of time, if in fact there is a silent majority in Westchester that is ready to embrace some level of change, that is ready to seize this moment in time and actually, make some real change after these platitudes of equity, then let's start acting like a majority. Let's start calling our mayors, showing up to zoning board meetings, showing up to planning board meetings. If there is in fact a silent majority in Westchester that's sick of living in one of the most segregated places and most expensive places in this country, let's start acting like the majority. Let's start showing up when Walter Balter proposes a beautiful building and say, I want this here. This is awesome. My mom is going to qualify for this unit. My neighbor's going to qualify for this unit. If we want our community to look at all different 10 years from now or 20 years from now, we have to assert some pressure. I think one thing that the development community has not done a great job with is, we get worried when there's a big NIMBY opposition. We haven't done as good a job of organizing the YIMBY and getting them in the room. And I'm up to that challenge as we seek to do this work in decades to come and make real change in Westchester.
That's great. I think, and I'm so sorry, I'm now like just
No, Rebecca, to you.
But I think that's great. And I just really want to reiterate part of what I said was that, the people that are the silent voices in the community are so used to being invisible to the community. And so I can't state enough how the leadership development piece is necessary. The silent majority is silent because they've been unseen for so long, not because they don't care, but because our communities have taught them that they don't care, that they're not valued, that they're not prioritized. And when you learn and live that lesson long enough, it shapes your behavior. So it's not a lack of caring, it's patterns that develop from the way you've been treated, right? So make no mistake, it will take leadership development and building of shared power, right? Because one voice feels scary, many voices absolutely feel retaliation, 100%, which is why we need good cause. And it's really harder. It's really easy to retaliate against one person. It's really easy to retaliate against 5 people. It's much harder to retaliate against 50 people, 75 people, 100 people. And so that's why it's really important to organize in a group. But I want to be really respectful of why these voices are silent. It's because they've been silenced. They've been silenced.
Abe, were you able to pick up on that one Post-it that talks about ensure planning includes preservation?
So Joan, I was actually about to, but since you're back, if you want to take that and give it to James.
I can't see the whole
Yes.
Post-it though, so the screen is too.
Got it. I will try and zoom in. But James, one thing I wanted to bring up was about ensuring how planning includes preservation of existing affordable housing. Hopefully you can see that on the zoomed in Jamboard.
I can see it now.
Yes. What are your thoughts and insight on that?
I'm actually glad you highlighted it because I was going to comment on something Rich had said about increasing just the overall count of affordable housing. We just need to just build more. But it's not only build more, it's what's important is keeping people in their homes. Preservation, while rehabs, rehabilitation, whether substantial or minor happen, they don't happen at such a large scale, and it's kind of more here and there. There's not really a community led or a neighborhood plan for how we're going to address the housing infrastructure needs of a given community. One thing I know that we see in the Bronx, particularly the West Bronx, is we have a lot of what city housing department likes to call hogs. And those are buildings that are, going on 100 years old. They're middle density between, depending on your definition of that, between 50, 125 units that still have the original boilers in there, the original systems, and they use a lot of energy, and just the overall upkeep is difficult. And what you see while lower density in Westchester is not only apartment buildings, but say the 2 or 3 family home, and the homeowner is having difficulty with the upkeep. We need more investment in keeping people in their homes. It's great when a new building opens. Everyone loves a ribbon cutting. Brings a lot of good press, but when someone leaves a bad condition and goes into a better condition, someone's going to replace that person in that poorly managed building. So we need to strategize, not only target, quote unquote, bad landlords. We need a strategy that looks at it comprehensively as communities that are at risk of losing what's already there. Because the most sustainable building is the one that already exists. It's not the one that we build. So how do we focus? How do we upgrade? And how do we maintain? If it's truly affordable now, how do we maintain that? And if it's not, how do we bring that to the community based on what needs are? So preservation doesn't necessarily mean historic preservation. It really means preserving the communities that already exist and try to minimize displacement as best as possible.
Well, thank you for making that distinction, James. And on that note, I'm afraid we're going to need to close this session, the second session of our Affordable Housing Crisis webinar series. I just want to give a huge thank you to all of our panelists this evening, to James and to Rebecca and to Bill and to Vito and to Rich Nightingale and Rich McSpedden and Bill Balter. Thank you all so much for being with us this evening. I think we heard a lot of potential solutions, and what we are understanding is that there is no one panacea. There's not one sort of silver bullet that's going to help move Westchester County toward affordable housing, but that it needs to be, a variety of things, multiple, coming from all sides, if you will, from the grassroots effort to the local zoning laws, and to really just how do we talk about this? I think overall, that plays a huge role in changing minds and in getting people to move from NIMBY to YIMBY, to yes in my backyard. So once again, thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our attendees and participants. We hope to see you again on May 5th as we take some of these solutions in that Jamboard and to create an action agenda. On May 5th is our third and last session of this webinar series. And we will be hearing from federal, state, and local elected officials and experts to talk about the steps that we need to take to create an action agenda so that we can affect and move to more fair and affordable housing across Westchester County. So thank you again to everyone. We greatly appreciate it, and hopefully we'll see you on May 5th right here. Thanks so much and have a good night.
Hold on to me as we go, as we